So our next speaker is a actual personal friend. We met through the social media venues that are part of our activism, and somewhere along the line I decided I was going to follow her, because every post that I read throughout this exposure to her information was not only compelling insofar as the knowledge, but so passionately driven towards being the change. And I'm always drawn to people who are willing to stand in the light and choose to be the change. Marcella Piper-Terry is not only a scientist, she is also the parent of a vaccine-injured child, and from that decided to create vaxtruth.org. So vaxtruth.org not only has her publications on there, but it also includes stories, the stories that are hidden and just completely ignored, dismissed, and called coincidences. She's taken the time to hold space and let the audience, the bigger audience, know of these accounts of these parents suffering and these children hurt. From that, then she decided to be one to help heal. So Marcella wears many hats, and she does it all in kindness and integrity, and I'm thrilled to introduce her. And she came with a booth, too.
Thank you, Irene. I'm so glad to be here, and I'm so honored to be speaking on such an amazing panel with Dr. Judy and Dr. Suzanne and Dr. James Lyons-Weiler and Ken Heckenlangley, and I'm so thrilled to be here. So I hope you can see my slides and hear me okay. I'm going to try to use my big voice, which I actually do have. And I've got a lot of information. I'm glad that Dr. Suzanne was talking a lot about whooping cough, because that kind of cuts down a little bit what I'm going to tell you. So the title of my talk is Who is Questioning Vaccines and Why? And what is the backlash? And we're going to start with this Fox News report from last week, actually. And Fox News came out and they said 73% say vaccines are unnecessary. Okay, so anytime you hear anything in the news, and this is not picking on Fox, it's just the news, right? Sort of. Okay, so let's look at that a little bit further. The American Academy of Pediatrics announced on August 29th, 2016, that, you can go to the next slide, please, that they published this Vaccine Delays, Refusals, and Patient Dismissals, a survey of pediatricians. So this is a recurring survey that they do, asking pediatricians. They send out this random sample of pediatricians, and they, in this particular random sample, they got back 627 replies from pediatricians about what they're seeing in their practices and what kind of information they're getting about why parents are refusing or delaying vaccines. So, next slide, please. And here's what they found. 73% of pediatricians report parents are refusing vaccines because they are unnecessary. Now, this is what the pediatricians are saying. 73% of those who were surveyed said that parents are refusing vaccines because they are unnecessary. This is fantastic news, guys, because this goes to that fear-mongering thing. You know, when you really do your research and you learn about that certain vaccine preventable diseases or vaccine-accessible diseases are not really as big bad monsters as what we're led to believe. So the results said that the proportion of pediatricians reporting parental vaccine refusals increased from 74.5% in 2006 to 87% in 2013. Pediatricians perceive that parents are increasingly refusing vaccinations because parents believe they are unnecessary. So, and that increased from 63.4% in 2006 to 73.1% in 2013. That's a very significant increase. Okay, so a total of 75% of pediatricians reported that parents delay vaccines because of concern about discomfort, and 72.5% indicated that they delay because of concern for immune system burden. In 2006, 6.1% of pediatricians reported
always dismissing patients for continued vaccine refusal, and by 2013, that percentage increased to 11.7%. That also is good news. Fire the pediatrician and find someone who will work with you for your child's benefit. Okay, next one. Oh, by the way, when you look down on my slides, at the bottom of my slides, oftentimes you'll see a little thing that says tinyurl.com/. And if you go back to the last one, just for we go just for a second. Okay, down at the bottom there, that says tinyurl.com/AAPvaxrefusals. That's the little link that I've created for you to find that information directly for yourself. Okay, next one. So one of the questions that a lot of people have, probably the biggest question about vaccines, is do vaccines cause autism? The CDC says no. The science says no. The science is settled. Vaccines do not cause autism. Vaccines do not cause autism. Vaccines do not cause autism, right? Over and over and over again. But the studies that the CDC has funded and has put out are focused on MMR and thimerosal. So that's 1 3-vaccine injection, the MMR vaccine, and 1 ingredient of many. Thimerosal is just one of the ingredients, multiple ingredients in vaccines, which also include aluminum, formaldehyde, 2-phenoxyethanol, polysorbate 80, a lot of things that are really nasty and that that are toxic to the human body. So, but they've looked at this one, thimerosal, and they say, because we've looked at MMR, because we've looked at thimerosal, vaccines do not cause autism. That's what they say. So the 2011 Institute of Medicine Vaccine Safety Review did not even look at Hib, which is Haemophilus B infection, hepatitis A, PCV, which is pneumococcal 13, rotavirus, or IPV, which is inactivated polio vaccine. So when they look at the information and they do their review about vaccines and autism, they didn't even look at five or six vaccines that are given to our children along with, every day in their vaccine appointments, which are otherwise known as well baby checkups. So they didn't even look at how these vaccines are administered. They just pulled out a few and said, oh, this doesn't cause autism. Okay, so that's kind of the quality of the research that we're looking at. The MMR research is tainted by the CDC whistleblower, which we'll talk about. You guys probably know about the CDC whistleblower, Dr. William Thompson, and that movie Vaxxed. And thimerosal studies are tainted by a guy named Paul Thorson, who is, as Bill Posey called him, a humongous scumbag. So in 2004, which actually was right after Dr. DeStefano went to the IOM and presented the information that was talked about in Vaxxed. He went over there and he gave them their washed results of the 2004 study. And right after that, in 2004, the IOM came out and said, you know what, we're not going to look for susceptible groups anymore. We're not going to look for causes of autism anymore. We're just going to, from now on, we're just going to do epidemiological studies. And the problem with that, from my perspective, not from theirs, but from my perspective, is that epidemiological studies can only ever show correlation. They can't ever show causation. They can't tell you what's causing something, right? And everybody, who in here's heard the saying, correlation does not equal causation? Okay, that's kind of a soundbite that we all get when we talk about vaccines and autism. Well, guess who made that a self-fulfilling prophecy? The IOM in 2004, when they said, we're not going to do any more studies that would show causation. From now on, we're only going to do epidemiological studies. And that's why when they come out and they say, there's just not enough research that shows a causal effect for vaccines and autism. And we made it that way. Okay. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so this is just like the overview of, or a brief snippet of an example of the quality and the linguistic kind of trickery or just flat out dishonesty that comes from the CDC and from these government agencies. This is the safety of vaccines used for routine immunization of U.S. children, a systematic review, and this was published in 2014. And this is directly from the results. Of 20,478 titles identified, 67 were included. That's less than 1%. So they identified more than 20,000 titles having to do with vaccine safety and looking at autism, and out of those 20,000 plus, they decided to actually look at 67, and then they called it a systematic review. Doesn't really sound too systematic to me. Okay, so just kind of going down, the limitations of the study include that the majority of studies did not investigate or identify risk factors for AEs, which is adverse events, and the severity of AEs was inconsistently reported. In their conclusions, we found evidence that some vaccines are associated with serious adverse events. However, these events are extremely rare and must be weighed against the protective benefits that vaccines provide. Next slide, please. So that humongous scumbag thimerosal researcher wanted by the feds, this is Paul Thorson, and he authored or co-authored 21 of 24 studies. The CDC claims disprove any link between vaccines and autism, and they still trust him and they still use his research. Thorson has, for several years now, topped the federal most wanted list for 22 counts of wire fraud and money laundering and faces 260 years in jail if they can ever, oh my gosh, can we find him? Can we extradite him from where he's hiding in Denmark? Gee, I wonder. Well, this was from 2014, and I actually stole this from Dr. Suzanne, one of her presentations, and I'm so glad she's not here to see me because right now I stole this. So this is from the Journal of Pediatric Research, July 2014, and if you look at this, it's cytokines associated with necrotizing enterocolitis in extremely low birth weight infants, and you look at all those names there, and oh, there he is, Paul Thorson. So they're funding him. They're sending, apparently, I don't think he's really working for free. Somebody has to have an address to send his paycheck to. So he is hiding and they can't extradite him so he can face those charges. Okay. All right, so this is about the MMR, the CDC whistleblower. Who here has seen the movie Vaxxed? Awesome, great. Okay, so I don't have to go into a lot of detail about this, but basically, this was from August 27th, 2014, so more than 2 years ago, when Dr. William Thompson came forward and said, yes, we committed fraud, we trashed the data, we brought in a garbage can, we threw it away, and we hid the evidence that MMR vaccine causes autism in African American males in particular, and in other children at a greatly increased rate of 700 to 800%. In those children who don't have any other developmental diagnoses. So basically every well child on the planet. And that's tinyurl.com, Thompson Statement. I think that's actually been moved. It might be Thompson Statement 1 now. So the next slide. This is just a picture of the Vaxxed bus. And I got that picture right there partly because I love Pauline and partly because it says, we are not government property. Can I get an amen on that? Yeah. For those who have seen Vaxxed and who would like to tell others how to see Vaxxed now, there's a tinyurl.com/watchvaxxed. That's where you can go. You can put that into your little computer address bar up there, and it will go to the website where you can download it onto your computer for 48 hours for $3.99, or you can buy the DVD. Okay, so is there any evidence to support Dr. Thompson's statement about MMR and increase in autism? This guy right here, anybody know who he is? Okay, well, his name is Dr. Gregory Poland, and he is a vaccinology scientist who is part of what he does is he works at the Mayo Clinic vaccine laboratory, which he founded in the 1980s. He's a big scientist, man. So he did this research, and he was doing this research on behalf of Merck, and he was looking at the rubella component of the MMR vaccine, but he was just looking at the rubella vaccine, and he was looking to see how different groups of people respond differently from an immune standpoint, and how the vaccine affects people. And guess what he found? He found that vaccines, just like every other medication on the planet, affect people differently. What a concept. They affect people differently based on their genetics, based on their other environmental factors, based on whatever, okay? So what he found was Somali Americans developed twice the antibody response to rubella from the current vaccine compared to Caucasians. A new Mayo Clinic study on individuals' aspects of immune response. A non-Somali African American cohort ranked next in immune response, still significantly higher than Caucasians. What does that mean? Well, here's the thing. African Americans in general have higher rates of autoimmune disease than white folks do. And part of that may be because they metabolize vitamin D differently, and vitamin D acts like a hormone, and so it kind of regulates the immune response, right? So it's no big surprise that African Americans would have a different response when you stimulate their immune system, because their immune system is different. And those of us who have children like mine, my daughter, and in my family, and a lot of families who have children who regress into autism after vaccines, they have a high incidence of autoimmune disease in their families. Our immune systems are different. Big shock. Vaccines affect us differently. It's really not rocket science. So that tinyurl.com/Poland rubella will take you to an article that I wrote on Vax Truth about this issue, and it has a little snippet there about him and what he says. Okay, so what's the significance of that, right? Somali Americans have the highest immune response to the rubella component of the MMR vaccine. Well, this is a Somali autism report from Autism Speaks from December 2013, and what they found was that high rates of autism among the Minneapolis Somali community, and they were high enough to really be significant. The overall rate at that time for autism was 1 in 48, and the Somali ASD rate was 1 in 32. Could that be because they react differently to vaccines, particularly that rubella component of the MMR vaccine, which is in that MMR vaccine in the movie Vax they talk about there? Okay, so this is, do I just kind of just talk about Dr. Poland a little bit? This is a slide or two slides that were taken off the internet from a talk or from a presentation that was on WebMD. And I kind of transferred that right here, but that's Dr. Poland down there, that little guy in the lower left corner. And this is what the disclosure statement reads. Dr. Poland has disclosed an affiliation with Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Merck & Company Incorporated, National Institutes of Health, NIH, Novartis Incorporated, Protein Sciences Corporation, University of Minnesota, VaxGen Incorporated, and VTEU Emory University grants research support, CSL Biotherapies, Dynavax Technologies, DynCorp International, Emergent Immune Solutions, GlaxoSmithKline, Merck & Company, I think he's really proud of Merck & Company because he put it in there twice, Novartis Vaccines, Novartis Incorporated, and Powder Med Limited as a consultant. So he works for a lot of people. He's definitely involved with Merck. And Merck makes the MMR vaccine. One thing I forgot to mention with Dr. Poland, which is in that video that's in my article on Vax Truth, but one of the things he talks about is what this means for, what is the results of his research mean for the future of vaccines, is that this is the future of individualized medicines, because if we can target vaccines to the recipient and to their unique individuality, then maybe we can make better vaccines for less money, and we can reduce the incidence of adverse effects. We can reduce the incidence of harm. So he knows that we are all different and that we deserve to be treated as individuals, right? Well, sometimes. This was taken from Women in Government website. Does anybody know who Women in Government are? Anybody? Oh boy, okay. Women in Government that's a group that you really need to kind of figure out. Women in Government is a private club, basically, that is composed of lady legislators, and they, each state has state directors for Women in Government. Women in Government, they have sponsors, and their sponsors want to treat them well, so their sponsors wine and dine them. They fly them to 5-star resort hotels where they get everything paid for, their transportation, air transportation, ground transportation, hotel room, dinners, meals, entertainment, drinks, and whatever, and in exchange they get to sit in rooms like this where their sponsors present information for them to take in and think about. And part of the goal of Women in Government, as stated on their website, is to partner with their sponsors to introduce legislation that benefits their sponsors. Guess who their sponsors are? Merck, GlaxoSmithKline. All of these vaccine manufacturers and other healthcare entities. So this was a slide, well this is actually the first slide from his presentation to the Women in Government State Directors Conference in January of 2016. And it was called Healthcare and Vaccine Wars in the 21st Century, Access, Money, Politics, Cognitive Biases, and Other Survival Lessons. This is what he disclosed. Gregory A. Poland, MD, Mary Lowell Leary, Professor of Medicine, Director, Mayo Vaccine Research Group, Director, Mayo Immunization Clinic, Mayo Clinic, Rochester, Minnesota. He didn't tell those lady legislators anything about who he works for, other than that right there. He forgot that other stuff. So he asks, Will you agree to hear a discerning but critical voice on the issue of access to health care of adults from a physician scientist who has practiced medicine for 36 years, even if it is different than yours? I'm putting on my white coat here. Will you listen to me? I'm a physician scientist with 36 years experience and I work for Merck. But we're not going to talk about that. So the good Dr. Scientist forgot to mention all of his paid associations with vaccine manufacturers and the CDC when he was introducing himself to our state lawmakers. So this whole presentation that Dr. Poland gave to the lady lawmakers focused on increasing uptake for vaccines for adults, adult mandates. They're coming for you. This is slide 33 out of 37. And yes, there is a typo there. It's not mine, it's Dr. Poland's. But what this says is another option. If a private donor could be identified who would provide each of you with a $1 million grant, his quotation marks, not mine, if you develop legislation and policies that materially improve the health of your states and communities, could you or would you do it? Would you take $1 million bribe to introduce legislation to increase mandates for vaccines in your states? Within a short period of time after he gave this talk, there were several of those state directors for women in government who did exactly that. They introduced legislation in multiple states to increase mandates for adults, including the HPV vaccine, which is made by Merck. So, and you can find that whole PowerPoint presentation at tinyurl.com/millions for mandates. So let's just think about that for a second. Wait a minute. Dr. Poland knows that we're all different, right? And that vaccines affect us differently, and that increases the risk to some people over others. That's called susceptible groups. And yet he turns around and offers bribes to our legislators to pass mandates to vaccinate us all as if we are exactly the same. Okay. This lady here is Dr. Bernadine Healy. She graduated from Harvard Medical School. She was the first woman to direct the National Institutes of Health. And in 2008, she did an interview with Cheryl Atkinson of CBS News, and she said, and the question was about vaccines and autism. Dr. Healy said, quote, "I think that the public health officials have been too quick to dismiss the hypothesis as irrational." End quote. Healy goes on to say, public health officials have intentionally avoided researching whether subsets of children are, quote, susceptible to vaccine side effects, afraid the answer will scare the public. Protect the program at all costs. So this is, again, from Dr. Healy, the next slide. We need to pursue research to identify susceptible groups. That's what we need to do. So Cheryl Atkinson asked Dr. Healy, "You're saying that the public health officials have turned their back on a viable area of research largely because they're afraid of what might be found?" Dr. Healy responded, "Among my colleagues at NIH and the Institute of Medicine, there is a completely expressed concern that they don't want to pursue a hypothesis because that hypothesis could be damaging to the public health community at large by scaring people. First of all," Healy said, "I think the public's smarter than that. The public values vaccines, but more importantly, I don't think you should ever turn your back on any scientific hypothesis because you're afraid of what it might show." She knew the science wasn't settled, and she knows they know the science isn't settled. And that was in 2008, so 8 years ago. So what does the independent research show? And I know that Dr. Suzanne talked a lot about this, and I'm just going to kind of go through it just briefly here, hopefully. This is a study that was published in 2010, and what they did is they looked at 2 sets of macaque infant monkeys, and macaque infant monkeys are a good group to study in the experimental causal research because they do share 93.5% DNA with humans. They had one set that was unvaccinated, one set vaccinated with the 1990s pediatric vaccine schedule. They compared the two. Next slide. The contrasting results were remarkable. The vaccinated monkeys showed increased brain growth, which the authors theorized may arise from the inability to prune neurons. Larger head size is a hallmark of human infants who later develop autism. The vaccinated primates also showed a different rate of maturation of the amygdala section of the brain than the non-vaccinated monkeys. Amygdala dysfunction has been long implicated in autism. The amygdala region is responsible for emotions, memory, and learning. Individuals with autism often struggle in these areas. So there was another follow-up study that was done using these same monkeys, and it was published in 2015. And there was a lot of hullabaloo about the study that says that, those people, they're so silly, those silly anti-vaccine people, they funded a study that showed that vaccines don't cause autism. Put the joke's on them, right? Well, this is where you can't trust the media because that's how they reported it, but what really happened and how is that significant? This is just one little part of this study, but I want to emphasize, because this is the way that these studies are conducted. So, this is the number of animals that they had. And that N right there means where it says 16, 12, 12, 12, 15, and 12. That's the number of subjects that are in each group. And so there were 16 control monkeys, and they got all saline placebos. So they actually got something that never happens in human trials for vaccines. They actually got a true saline placebo. In our vaccine trials for the vaccines they give to us, and our children, they don't use saline placebo. They use either the adjuvant or another vaccine as a placebo, but that's another talk. So 1990s pediatric schedule, they had 12 of them, and they were vaccinated according to the vaccine regimen for 1990s. And the 1990s primate schedule, they adjusted the timing because those little infant macaques mature at a different rate than the humans, and there were 12 of those. And then TCVs are thimerosal-containing vaccines, 12 monkeys got those. MMR, 15 monkeys got the MMR, but those monkeys didn't get anything else. They just got the MMR vaccine. So that's not like what we do with ours, because they get everything all together. So, and then according to the 2008 schedule, they had 12 monkeys that were actually vaccinated according to the 2008 schedule, which means they got they got all the vaccines. They got the aluminum-containing vaccines, and they got the MMR and everything. And they found that there was no association between the vaccines and the monkeys developing autism. Well, here's the problem with that. At the time when the study was published in 2015, the rate of autism was 1 in 68. So in order for this data to be valid, they would have to have 68 monkeys in each one of those groups. And if they got one monkey out of the group that was vaccinated with the 2008 schedule, if they got one monkey that exhibited autistic-like symptoms, then that would be kind of consistent with what we see in the human population. But they had nowhere near as many monkeys as they needed. So it's not a valid study. Okay, next. Aluminum, this is just, I'm talking about aluminum vaccine adjuvants in autism. Aluminum is a big problem, and I think maybe others are going to talk about that, so I'm not going to harp on this, but basically the more aluminum in the vaccine schedule, the more autism that you get, and this has been studied worldwide, and it's kind of consistent because aluminum is neurotoxic and immune toxic. Okay, next. This is a study on hepatic response to aluminum toxicity, dyslipidemia, and liver diseases. So we're injecting our babies on the first day of life with a hepatitis B vaccine that contains 250 micrograms of aluminum because we want to prevent them from developing liver disease decades down the road if they should happen to become infected with hepatitis B, which is sexually transmitted and spread by needle-using drug users. So, but what happens in response to that is the aluminum in the vaccine actually targets the mitochondrial metabolism in the liver. So it's damaging the liver because of the aluminum, so it's really not doing what we're hoping it would do. So, next slide. So what has not been studied by the CDC? All of this is the 2016 actually, I think that one's 2015, but this is the CDC schedule. So all of that hasn't been studied. So when you take your baby in for those vaccine appointments, aka baby checks, and they're getting 6 to 8 to 9 to 10 vaccines at the same time, none of that has ever been studied. That's called synergistic effects. So they'll study 1 or 2 vaccines at the same time, and then they'll say, oh, that's safe, let's add it to the schedule. That is experimentation on human subjects, which is against the Nuremberg Code. And the CDC is doing it every single day, and they're lying to doctors about it. I attended a talk in October of 2015 where a CDC representative was talking to medical students and healthcare students at USI in Evansville, Indiana. And he stood up there and said, oh yeah, vaccines are studied to the nth degree. They're double-blind, placebo-controlled studies. They're studied more than any kind of medication with placebo control, and we always study everything before it's added to the schedule. You know what that is? BS. He's lying. Because the CDC are lying liars that lie. That's what they do. Okay, so, and they say that adverse reactions are really rare, right? 1 in a million. But in Canada, in 2011, they studied events following 12 and 18-month vaccines, and the authors reviewed the vaccination records and medical histories of more than 450,000 children. That would never happen in the United States because doctors don't report adverse events, so it's not in their medical histories. So the results said that 4 to 12 days post the 12-month vaccination, children had a 1.33 increased relative risk of the combined endpoint compared to the control period, or at least one event during the risk interval for every 168 children. What that means is 1 in 168 had an adverse event severe enough to send them to the emergency room. And guess what? Canada's schedule is smaller than ours. They don't get as many vaccines as ours do. I guess maybe our children are just tougher, so 1 in a million, right? So 10 to 12 days post 18-month vaccination, the incidence was 1.25 for increased relative risk, which at least one excess event for every 730 children vaccinated. Next slide. So this is vital statistics this is an IMR study, which is infant mortality rate, and I'm going to try to do this quickly, but this is from September 24, 2014, published in the National Vital Statistics Reports, which is a CDC publication. And what that shows, that graph there shows at the top is Finland, Japan, Portugal, Sweden, and they have 2.3, 2.5 deaths per 100,000 children during their first year of life. And if you go all the way down at the bottom there, the United States is dead last. We have 6.1. That's our infant mortality rate during the first year of life. So our infant mortality rate is like 3 times that of these guys up here at the top. So if the United States gives more vaccines than any other country, our children are more highly vaccinated, they're more comprehensively vaccinated, and vaccines are really good because they save lives, but yet 3 times as many children are dying in their first year of life in the United States as in these other countries. Does that make any sense? No. Okay, so what they did is, now historically, and doctors will tell you this, the reason the United States has such a high infant mortality rate is because we go to such great lengths to save extremely early babies who are born prior to 24 weeks, 22 weeks, and babies who are extremely low birth weight. So, and that has always been the explanation for our high infant mortality rate. What they did in this study is they factored that out. They said, okay, well, we're not going to look at babies. We're going to take out these babies in this sub-analysis of the data. We're going to take out those babies that are born early. We're going to look at babies who are full term. And what they found was that compared to Sweden, because we have very similar socioeconomic kind of stuff, and so compared to Sweden, 39% of the United States' higher infant mortality rate was due to more preterm births, but 47% was due to higher infant mortality among full-term babies. For infants born at 37 weeks gestation or more, the United States infant mortality rate is highest among the country's studies and about twice the rates for Denmark, Finland, Norway, Sweden, and Switzerland. And the difference amounts to 7,300 babies per year. So what's different between the US and those other countries? The vaccine's given in the first year of life. Finland gives 15, Sweden gives 12, Denmark gives 12, Norway gives 12, Switzerland gives 17, and the United States gives 25 to 26 by 6 months of age. None of the Scandinavian countries gives the hepatitis B vaccine unless the mother is positive for hepatitis B. Okay, this is the US schedule, vaccine schedule for 1983. Next page, next slide, please. Sorry, go ahead to the next one. And what that shows is 24 doses of 7 vaccines between 2 months and 16 years of age. The estimated autism rate in the 1980s, in 1983, was 1 in 10,000 in the United States. Next slide. This is the vaccine schedule for 2016 in the United States. Now, babies who are vaccinated according to the schedule get 25 to 26 doses of 9 vaccines between birth and 6 months. If mom's vaccinated during the pregnancy, you can add tetanus, diphtheria, pertussis, and flu. So that goes up to, 28, 29, 30. And then 49 to 50 doses of 14 vaccines by kindergarten and 70 doses of 15 vaccines by age 18. Next slide. This is a statement from the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, and this states an independent review of the VAERS data. VAERS is the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, which is a whole other issue, but publications by governmental pro-vaccine and anti-vaccine groups and a sample of the medical literature leads to the following conclusion. For most children, the risk of a serious vaccine reaction may be 100 times greater than the risk of hepatitis B. In nearly 20% of VAERS reports, the first of 8 listed side effects suggest central nervous system involvement. There may be large genetic differences in susceptibility to vaccine adverse effects. Really? Striking increases in chronic illnesses have occurred in temporal association with an increase in vaccination rates, and hepatitis B vaccine as a cause of sudden infant death has not been ruled out. So when you're thinking about whether a vaccine is necessary or a good thing for your child, you do something called a cost-benefit analysis. Are you saying?
10 minutes.
High five in 10? No, 10 minutes, right? Okay. All right. So you want to decide, is your child at risk for that illness? Hepatitis B is not common in childhood, not highly contagious, primarily an adult disease, transmitted through infected body fluids, most frequently infected blood. Is prevalent in high-risk populations such as needle-using drug addicts, sexually promiscuous heterosexual and homosexual adults, residents and staff of custodial institutions such as prisons, healthcare workers exposed to blood, persons who require repeated blood transfusions, babies born to infected mothers. Next slide, please. Not a very serious disease for most. 95% of patients have a favorable course and recover completely. Most don't require hospital outcome or hospital care. Case fatality ratio is very low, and those who recover completely from hepatitis B acquire lifelong immunity. Next slide. So how many children have died from the hepatitis B vaccine? According to VAERS, through data reported through July 14th, 2016, in children ages 0 to 17 years, there have been 872 deaths and 832 deaths in children under 3 years of age. So does it work? In a study published in 2011, researchers investigating the long-term efficacy of the hepatitis B vaccine reported, quote, among children who respond to the complete primary 3-dose vaccination series with anti-hepatitis B concentrations of 0.10, blah, 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 that's the response rate, right? 15 to 50% have low or undetectable concentration of antibodies 5 to 15 years after the start of the vaccination series. So if we're giving them their first vaccine on the first day of life for a sexually transmitted disease, and they have no evidence of immunity at age 5, why in the heck are we doing this? Does that make any sense at all? Hepatitis B vaccine is one of those vaccines that is required for your child to go to daycare or for your child to go to public school. Required unless you live in one of those states where we still have religious and philosophical exemptions. This is actually the report of a child that I saw in practice, and she's 4 years old, was fully vaccinated as an infant, and had at age 4 had no evidence of immunity to hepatitis B. So it's all risk for no benefit. All right, so I'm not going to go into a lot and skip over a lot of the DTaP and TDAP stuff that I have here, but I want to share this with you. This is, we talk about fear-mongering. This is an actual case, and this is a quote. This is a DTaP vaccine death as a result of fear-mongering by a pediatrician. And this is from a woman, her name is Carrie Bundy. She lives in Indiana, and she's amazing. This is a photo that she shared on Facebook, and this is what she said. My silly boy, Oliver, sick with pertussis, is pictured on the left. He wasn't vaccinated. My vaccinated son, Mason, is pictured on the right. Sorry, I try not to do this, but it's hard not to. This is how I took his remains home with me a few days after he got his DTaP vaccine, which I chose for him because I was made to feel terrified of deadly pertussis. Again, Oliver is sick with pertussis in the photo on the left. Chance of getting sick and dying from pertussis is 0.003832%. She was bullied by her pediatrician. She took him in, and he was born premature. He had just gotten over RSV and was hospitalized. And the pediatrician wanted to give him the DTaP vaccine, and that was the only one who was going to get that day because they were going to spread them out. pediatrician said, if you don't do this, in essence, you are signing his death certificate. And he died 4 days later. The pediatrician sent stuffed animals to the siblings, by the way. So I'm going to skip over this because I'm going to run out of time otherwise, and I'm going to skip over that because Dr. Suzanne talked about the vaccine and the problems with the vaccine and herd immunity and all of that. There's an article on VaxTruth that I read. It's called "Let's Talk About Whooping Cough," and so if you go to VaxTruth and just kind of whooping cough, you can find it there. She talked about the pertussis mutating. Parapertussis is causing up to 40% of cases of whooping cough in California. They're not telling you that, they're just telling you it's all because of unvaccinated kids, right? Okay, so flu vaccines. Anybody, who in here thinks the flu vaccine is really important to get every year? Okay, so this is really important for you to think about because I sat on a plane yesterday with a man who, when he asked me if I was going to Phoenix for business or if I lived there, and I said, I'm going for a conference, and he said, what kind of conference? And I said, it's a vaccine education conference, and he said, oh, thank God. He said, I really need to talk to my brother-in-law and see if he'll come to that. He's one of those anti-vaccine wackos who think that vaccines cause autism. And I said, well, actually, I'm one of them, and that's what we're talking about. And so, which is why I was finishing my PowerPoint presentation at about, 5 minutes ago, because I spent almost the entire plane ride from Chicago and the 2 hours we were delayed on the ground talking to him about vaccines. And one of the things we agreed on, and he doesn't get the flu shot because he doesn't think it's necessary. And he's not going to get the HPV vaccine for his kid because he doesn't think it's necessary and it's dangerous. But everybody else should still vaccinate their kids with all of these other ones because that's what he believes. What about polio? So hopefully he'll be buying Dissolving Illusions soon. So the flu vaccine causes deaths. It is actually the most frequently reported. Let's go to the next one now. The most frequently reported adverse event now to theirs and in the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. Flu shot for pregnant women, they tracked it in the 2009-2010 increased incidence of fetal death up 2,440%. Let's go to the next. I want to read the conclusion on that. Simplistically speaking, it would have been 85 to 192 times safer not to vaccinate from the perspective of the in utero child. So it doesn't work, and I want to just, this down at the bottom here, it doesn't prevent viral transmission or complications. Go to the next one. I'm getting rushed here. The last on the bottom there, it says, the CDC authors clearly do not weight interpretation by quality of the evidence, but quote anything that supports their theory about the flu vaccine. That's from the Cochrane collaboration. Okay, so this is an example. Go back to the slide you were at. Yeah, this is an example of fear mongering. This was posted on Facebook and was reshared millions of times about baby Griffin and my poor baby. He's going to get the measles because he was exposed. He never got the measles. And Griffin's grandfather is Alan Hibben. He's an investor, owns 7.5 million shares of stock with a pharma company. So we know what the motivation was on that. The problem, parents taking vaccines is unnecessary. The solution, fear-mongering and pitting parents against each other. Next slide. Problem for the vaccine makers and the CDC. Parents won't go away. This is in Mississippi. This is a group of parents on the Capitol steps in Mississippi. Next slide. The parents won't go away, and they're bringing their children. And the signs say, the little girl on the left says, I had a bowel obstruction after the rotavirus vaccine. The one in the middle says, fired by my pediatrician for wanting to delay. The one on the right says, I have to be injured like my brother before I can get an exemption. So the problem in Mississippi with the legislators, Mississippi has been the gold standard for the vaccine companies because Mississippi doesn't allow any exemptions other than medical exemptions, and they really don't allow medical exemptions because they deny them. But the problem is that legislators are listening to the parents because they're hearing the stories. The solution is lie to the legislators. Those two ladies on either side of me, there are Mary Jo Perry and Lindy Hughes McGee, who are the co-founders of Mississippi Parents for Vaccine Rights. This is a quote from what Mary Jo said. The Mississippi Medical Association was having a white coat event for legislators, and we're feeding them dinner. When our bill author, Representative Mark Hornby, was greeted at the door as he entered the event, the physician at the door welcoming him recognized that he was that anti-vaccine legislator, so she was just filling him in that 10 kids died from the Disney measles outbreak. Nobody died in the Disney measles outbreak. They are lying to the legislators. Of course, he abruptly corrected her and told her he didn't know where she was getting her information, but she needed to fact check what she was being told before she embarrassed herself again. So the moral of this is, thanks to people like Irene Pye, our legislators are being educated. And we are making progress. So let's skip the next one. Next one, this is just something this is current event stuff. This came out last week. Parents are increasingly refusing vaccines, and the solution, the AAP calls for an end to all non-medical exemptions from vaccination. And the next slide, and I really want to have time for this just very quickly. This was introduced August 15th, and it's online in the Federal Register. The problem, vaccine compliance is falling. The CDC solution, because our legislators are listening to parents, and those bills that are being introduced are being defeated, the solution by the CDC is we're just going to grant ourselves the power to issue federal orders and declare pandemics of measles and quarantine and isolate and keep you under quarantine or isolation until you submit to vaccination, because this is about you, the adults in this room, and what they consider somebody who is unprotected. Is anybody in this room, who in this room has your vaccination record showing that you've had 2 MMR vaccines after 1987? Anybody? Okay, one person out of this whole room. That means you would be the only one that if there was a measles outbreak, which is one case, and it could be measles that was caused by the vaccine, everybody in this room would be subject to quarantine and being held in isolation under federal order until you submit to vaccination, because you are pre-communicable. Okay, and I'm going to just go through this next one. This is a really scary part of this. This is how they're saying the agreements. The CDC may enter into an agreement with an individual upon such terms as the CDC considers to be reasonably necessary, indicating that the individual consents to any of the public health measures authorized under this part, including quarantine, isolation, conditional release, medical examination, hospitalization, vaccination, and treatment, provided that the individual's consent shall not be considered as a prerequisite to any exercise of authority under this part. What? That's not an agreement. We're going to make an agreement with you, but you don't have to agree to it. We're going to hold you until you consent. Okay, so diseases affected by this rule, this is table 4. Measles, this is a 2-column table. Measles is cell 1-1 on the left side. Don't tell me this is not about measles. They are lumping measles in with Ebola. Measles, pertussis, tuberculosis, rubella, rabies, viral hemorrhagic fever, meningococcal disease, Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome, coronavirus or MERS, and varicella. How many of you have had your chickenpox vaccines? And guess what? It doesn't matter if you had it as a kid, because for the purposes of this, even if it's in your medical records, they won't take that as evidence, and they won't take titers either. You have to get the vaccines. And this is not something this is how they're going to go around the laws and the fact that the legislators are listening to us. So the CDC is accepting comments, and you can send if you want to send it by snail mail right there, look at that, send it to the Division of Global Migration and Quarantine, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and there's the address for you.
Take a picture.
And you can find that at tinyurl.com/CDC proposed rule. Okay, the good news, remember I said there's always good news, the end note? The enemy is not fighting you because you're weak. The enemy is fighting because you are strong. And you are